Mike heard Reuben before he saw him. He followed the rhythmic thud of an axe against wood through the grove of trees at the top of the hill. At the edge of the small clearing, dappled with sunlight and shade, Mike stopped. Reuben, his coat off, his shirt dark with sweat, swung the axe high in an arc to come thudding down on a fallen tree. In just one motion, as the wood groaned and cracked, he tugged the axe from the cleft it had made, circled it back up, and slammed it down again. Mike hesitated to break the rhythm as he stepped forward. A twig snapped underneath his shoe. Reuben looked up. Slowly he lowered the axe and smiled. "How long does it take to finish a plate of apples and cream?" "It wasn't the food that kept me," Mike said. "It was the riders who came to see Marta." "Riders?" Reuben wiped the sweat that was dripping from his shaggy eyebrows into his eyes. Mike told Reuben how the meal had been interrupted. He couldn't help shaking his head a little when he got to the part about Mrs. Friedrich being so afraid that thieves would come for her jewelry and the Friedrichs' money. "Who steals my purse steals trash," Reuben said. "Oh, no, not trash," Mike said. "Since Mrs. Friedrich's so worried, they must have a great deal of money. The Friedrichs are no different from other hard-working farmers who came from German states to sell in Missouri. They mistrust paper money and insist on dealing in gold and silver coinage. Furthermore, they have a deep suspicion of banks, so they keep what they call their hard money at home." Reuben rubbed the back of his neck and took a firm grip on the axe. "I'm going to break this dead hickory. You can gather the twigs and limbs and chunks of kindling and bind them into bundles," he pointed. "You'll find twine over there under that pine tree." Mike worked hard, occasionally pausing to arch his back, which had been feeling much less sore, and stretch and knead his neck and shoulders. Reuben did the same. Reuben finally called, "Let's take a rest," and laying down the axe, he flopped on his back. He rested his head on his crossed arms and stared at the sky. "There's a difference in the sky over land and the sky over water." Mike sat on the ground, pulled his pocket knife, and whittled chips from a nearby twig. "You ever put Shakespeare say that?" "No, it's something that every riverboatman knows." "Tell me what kind of boat you worked on," Mike said. "A flatboat? It's a long boat with a small cabin, 2 sweeps on each side, and..." "What are sweeps?" "Oars, poles with flat ends. Each boat carries a crew to man the sweeps, a captain and a cook. Flatboats are built and caulked on the riverbank, loaded with cargo, floated down the towns much further south. Then there's a good market for potatoes or corn or wherever the boat carries. The boat's sold there along with the cargo, and the crew catches the next stern or side wheeler and sails up the river again to start over." "Doesn't sound very exciting," Mike said. "Not as exciting as riding the Pony Express." Reuben chuckled. "Oh, but it is. There's hidden sandbars and fast currents, and some places enough boats of all kinds to run down any craft not quick enough to get through. And there's draftsmen who'll pick a fight with anyone who are the worst kind of river rats. There's river pirates to worry about, too. They'd soon steal your cargo and leave you for dead as not. If you can manage to get where you're headed, you've got to contend with the merchants who try to drive such a hard bargain for your goods as to make the whole trip not worth the while." In his mind's eye, Mike could see a swift boat bearing down on his flatboat. It was filled with pirates, scarves around their heads, knives gripping their teeth. Then with the wild shouts they brandished swords and leapt from the deck of the flatboat. But Mike was too quick for him. Raising his sweep of the water, he laid about it with it, knocking pirates right and left into the water, while his mates on the flatbread cheered. Mike heard a crack of the twig in the woods nearby and looked up sharply, but he didn't see anything. Probably a squirrel or rabbit, he decided, and turned back to Reuben. "Wouldn't it be safer to work on one of the big steamboats?" "Steamboat hands have problems too," Reuben said. "Each man has his own choice, and mine is a flatboat." He sighed. "Der einen Sommer gont gewarten." Mike stared at him. "What does that mean?" "Only one summer grant me, you mighty ones." "It's German. Holderlin, my mother's favorite poet." "My mother was German." Holderlin loved his country so much. "Are you German like the Friedrichs?" Mike asked. "Not like them, but my heritage stems from their country." Mike heard a small noise again, but it was further away. He listened again. Maybe a deer from the sound of it, too heavy for a smaller animal. The gentle noises of the country were so different from the ones he knew well in the city, but one by one Mike was beginning to recognize them. Reuben's long legs bent like a pretzel as he scrambled to his feet. "Up, up," he said, "and back to work. You keep tying one of the bundles with the mules to help us cart those bundles to the shed." The rest of the day Mike worked hard to keep up with Reuben. There were animals to care for and feed, tools to mend, vegetable garden to hoe, wood to carry to the outdoor bin and those beside the fireplaces. And when Marta finally rang the bell to call the men to supper, Mike was so exhausted he wanted only to fall into bed. "Don't anger Mr. Friedrich," Marta whispered to Mike. "Wash up all the way to the elbows, comb your hair, come to the table." She winked to give him a friendly pat on the back. Quick about it, too. Mike scrubbed his face and arms with water, shivering as he scrubbed hard with the lump of lye soap. In a way, he hated to remove all the warm, comfortable smells of the cows and the barn and the fresh chopped wood and the meadow grasses. The country life wasn't half bad if you didn't mind a more than generous share of hard work. Mike wondered how his brother Danny was faring. Did he have cows to send to pasture and bring back to barn at night? Wouldn't it have been grand if they could have worked side by side? But instead they'd been parted, and he didn't know when he'd ever see his brother again. Mike thought about the couple who'd chosen Danny and Peg. They looked pleasant. He hoped they were good people, but he didn't know enough about them to tell for sure. Would they make a good home for Danny and Peg? Would they know how badly Danny had missed Da, how much he needed the love of a father? If Danny ever needed his big brother, would he be able to let Mike know? Mike rubbed hard at his face with a linen towel. He knew enough to hurry without a warning from Marta, and pushed thoughts of his family to the back of his mind. Throwing a longing glance toward his comfortable bed, Mike ran from his room and down the stairs, arriving in the dining room before the others. He overheard voices in the parlor. "But they were, Papa," it was Gunter insisting. "I couldn't hear all the words they said, but I certainly recognized German words. Reuben was speaking to Mike in German." Mike was startled. It hadn't been dear. The noise he had heard in the woods had been Gunter's spying. "Michael, you're here already," Mrs. Friedrich spoke loudly, and there was sudden silence in the next room. Mr. Friedrich, Gunter close behind him, appeared in the doorway. They stared at Mike with such deep suspicion that Mike frantically tried to think of the right thing to say. "Got here first, which means I'm probably the hungriest." He tried to sound cheerful and hoped his laughter didn't sound as false to them as it did to himself. "Why'd you not come in the parlor to join us?" Mr. Friedrich demanded. "In the parlor? Oh, is that where you were?" Mike asked. He saw the muscles in Mr. Friedrich's jaw begin to relax. "Be seated," Mr. Friedrich barked, apparently satisfied that Mike hadn't overheard Gunter. Mike gladly slipped into his chair. Mike folded his hands for Mr. Friedrich's prayer. He tried to concentrate. At first he did, but as Mr. Friedrich droned on, Mike's thoughts focused on meal times his true family had shared in New York City. He could picture everyone seated around the table. Ma would bow her head and say the blessing, sometimes reaching out, tap a hand that was trying to snatch a crumb. Mike couldn't figure out how Ma could see with her eyes closed, but she never missed a trick. Their meals together, ever since Da had died, the portions were often too small to fill their stomachs, but they were usually noisy, cheerful times, with each of the Kellys having something to say and not always waiting for a turn in which to say it. Mike saw Ma's raised smile as she helped Petey, the youngest Kelly. He thought of Peg, who never could sit still, even when she was eating, and Danny with his mischievous grin, and Megan with her gentle ways. Frances Mary, who tried to be grown up as Ma, but could easily collapse into a fit of giggles any time Mike had the mind to make silly faces. Suddenly Da's sunburned face, with the laugh crinkles around his eyes, came to Mike's mind so strongly he clenched his hands together tightly. "Oh, Da," he thought, "troubles began when you left us. Why'd you have to die?" The memory hurt so much Mike's stomach ached and tears rushed to his eyes, some of them escaping before he could rub them away. Michael, Mr. Friedrich was calling his name. Mike immediately came back to the present, terrified that Mr. Friedrich would be an angry again, but the man was actually smiling. "I see your heart was touched." Mr. Friedrich nodded with self-satisfaction. "I believe there is hope for you, if you will keep in mind the fearful picture I have just described of the afterlife that waits for those who do not mend their wicked ways." Mike nodded. He pulled a cotton handkerchief from his pocket and blew his nose, hoping he could cover the surprise that must have shown on his face. It was a narrow squeak. Marta carried the huge tureen filled with thick soup and dark wheat bread and butter to go with it. Mrs. Friedrich's eyes twinkled as she watched Mike. "Do you like my soup, Michael?" she whispered. The mingled vegetables, spices, and beef. Mike closed his eyes, savoring the deep, rich taste of the mingled vegetables, spices, and beef. "It's far too good to be called soup," he murmured. She giggled. "There's warm gingerbread to follow, and just for you, the rest of last night's spiced peaches." Gunter raised his head from his soup plate. "I want peaches, too." "There's only enough for one portion," Mrs. Friedrich said. "Michael will have it. He must fatten up and grow strong and tall." Gunter glared at Mike, but Mike didn't care. He was too sleepy to worry about Gunter, and those peaches would be awfully good. He did notice that during the rest of the meal, Gunter wore a scowl. Gunter's expression grew darker when Mr. Friedrich finally laid his fork on his empty plate and said, "Get to bed now, Gunter. School tomorrow. You have to get an early start." "School!" Mike's eyes flew up and he sat up eagerly. At last, Andrew McNair told them they'd have schooling, and Mike couldn't wait till it started. "We have a schoolhouse just 2 miles away," Mrs. Friedrich began to explain, "and the teacher is a fine young woman who boards with—" "Enough!" Mr. Friedrich interrupted. "Michael will not be going to school." Mike forgot to be cautious and blurted out, "But we were told we were going to get schooling till we are 14. Mr. Friedrich shrugged. "You'll be sent to school someday. To learn one thing at a time is much better than filling a mind with too much at once. For now you must be trained in the work to be done on the farm." "Oh, I could do both," Mike insisted. "I'll work hard, I promise." "We'll not talk again of schooling until you're used to your new home and duties," Mr. Friedrich said. Without another word, he pushed back his chair and left the dining room. Mrs. Friedrich followed, and Gunter paused, only to smirk at Mike, and hurried to join his parents. Mike could hear the boards groan and snap under their weight as they started up the stairs. "Maybe Mr. Friedrich would change his mind if I told him I can already read. I won't need to spend too much time studying," Mike thought. He began to follow them, but was stopped when he heard a low growl of Mr. Friedrich's whisper. "Oh, no," Mrs. Friedrich whimpered. "All these years you've been afraid they would send someone after you. Do you think that Reuben—" "Quiet," Mr. Friedrich snapped, and Mike slid back against the wall, melting into the shadows. He slipped into the dining room and stood by the table, trying to piece together and understand all the strange facts he'd heard. Ulrich, the one who had died, had been a thief. And for some reason Mike still didn't know, Mr. Friedrich had been afraid for a long time that someone would be sent after him. Mike's mind raced. There was only one reason for this fear. Mr. Friedrich had murdered Ulrich. Horrified by his conclusion, Mike caught his breath, and now Mr. Friedrich suspected that Reuben was the one who was after him. Was it only because Reuben had spoken German? Was Reuben really after Mr. Friedrich? No, Mike told himself. Reuben just knew German poetry. But Mike realized he had to talk to Reuben about Mr. Friedrich's suspicions. If Mr. Friedrich had killed one man, Mike squared his shoulders. He was wasting time talking to himself. He had to help with the dishes and get himself to bed. He reached for a bowl but stopped as a deep yawn shuddered through his body. Marta swung into the room and began to stack the plates and took a look at Mike. "You're asleep on your feet. Go on to bed." "I'll help you," Mike said, and picked up the bread platter and butter dish to carry to the kitchen. "Hans Friedrich's a hard man," Marta said with a sigh as she placed the dirty dishes on the table. "He should send you to school." Mike looked up surprised. "You heard?" "There isn't much that Marta misses." Mike turned to see Reuben sitting in a chair in the dim light next to a fireplace. "I'd like to know what goes on in this house," she said. "You'd know, too, if you could ever get your long nose out of that book." She shook her head in wonder as she turned to Mike. "Would you believe that Reuben reads while he's eating?" "I can believe that," Mike said. "That's what I did with my book back home." Marta studied him. "You really know how to read?" "Yes," Mike said proudly. "Don Francis taught me." "Can you cipher?" Reuben asked. And Mike looked puzzled. Reuben explained. "Add, subtract figures?" "A little." "Well, perhaps while we work I can teach you some of the science of mathematics, besides giving you an introduction to the language of poetry." Reuben held up a worn poetry book as though it were a treasure. Marta made a face. "If you're like me," she said to Mike, "you won't understand that poetry at all." Her eyes crinkled with laughter as she added in conspiratorial tone, "I don't know why those poets couldn't just say what they want to say in plain words we could all understand." Mike's answer didn't get out as his words were followed by another gigantic yawn. "Go to bed," Marta said. "The day begins only too early around here, and you look more than ready for sleep." "I bid you good night, too," Reuben said, and left the kitchen before Mike could warn him of anything. The moment the door had closed behind Reuben, Mike said, "Marta, if you know what goes on in this house, you must know why Mr. and Miss Friedrich are afraid." Her eyes opened wide and her lips parted as though she had something to say, but before she had the chance, Mike said, "Why would someone from Germany be sent after Mr. Friedrich? You know, don't you?" Marta gasped. Mike grasped Mike by the shoulders and held him tightly, her face so close to his he could feel her warm breath on his skin. "Never ask me such questions again. What happened in Germany is over. It's not something to talk about. It's not something for you to know." "Just tell me one thing," Mike was insistent. "You've told me you're not afraid of Mr. Friedrich, but that's not all the truth, is it?" The despair on Marta's face was all the answer Mike needed. He pulled away and hurried up the stairs before she spoke. In his room with the door tightly closed, Mike raised the lower sash of his window, pulled off his shoes, and threw back the quilt on his bed. But when he saw what lay in his bed, he jumped back and clapped a hand over his mouth to stifle a cry. Sprawled in the middle of the bed was a hideous squashed body of a large pond frog. Quickly, Mike shot a glance at each side and stooped to look under the bed. Gunter was not in the small room, and there was nowhere else to hide. Mike gingerly picked up the ugly mess by the toes of one leg, carried it to the window, and tossed it outside. Mike pulled the window down, scrubbed at his hands in the basin of water, and used the corner of his towel to rub at the place where the frog had lain. Everyone knew that if you touched a frog, you could get warts. Just to be safe, he scrubbed his hands again. Mike placed the towel over the spot and was so exhausted he stumbled into bed. He tried to push the frog out of his mind. Stupid Gunter. Did he think he'd upset Mike for more than an instant with that sickening frog? Gunter wasn't even smart enough to come up with anything but dumb, childish tricks. Mike tugged the puffy down quilt up to his ears, grudgingly admitting to himself that he had been caught again by one of those tricks. He shivered as he wondered, what would Gunter try next?